Further thing, I want to introduce our Mayor Emeritus, Tim Burchett.
Thank you, John. If I go 30 minutes, I've asked Will Pugh to fake a heart attack right there, so we got to get the heck out of here. So, and thank you for the kind introduction. Angela Goodell, where are you, Angela? Right here. Her deceased husband and my daddy were in the Marine Corps League together, and I appreciate you and I appreciate him and their great service to our country. Being the son of a Marine, it's interesting at best. I remember when I was registering to vote. No, excuse me, I was registering for the draft. When you turned 18 back then, you're the whatever they called it. It wasn't technically the draft. And I remember I was down at the election commission where we were doing it, and my dad was humming the Marine Corps hymn as he did that. So I was always made very much aware that if my grades did not increase, I would be headed on a boat to Paris Island very shortly. And so anyway, but I appreciate it. I'm going to talk about several issues, and then I'll stop and answer any question you have. Of course, they're all fair. And I did want to remind everybody that be careful what you say. Georgiana Vines is over there, a longtime reporter for the Knoxville News Sentinel, and everything. Yeah, everything is on the record, and even if she says it's not, it's on the record, so get ready. You'll read about it tomorrow in the paper. But there's several issues I'm concerned about, and it's a pleasure, and it was a pleasure serving as the mayor of Knox County. I think we're in great hands now. As I left Glenn Jacobs with 3 words, and they were, "Don't wreck it." And that's because we've got, and the main thing I've always said is, and something my dad told me shortly before he passed away, was follow the money. We've got an excellent finance team associated with with Knox County. The economy is an issue that's very near and dear to everybody in here's heart, I'm sure. As the mayor of Knox County, we paid down $45 million in debt, which is no small thing, because if you remember when I took over, I was encouraged, if not threatened, that we needed a major tax increase. And not only did we accomplish everything we needed to do without the tax increase, we paid down debt. And folks say, well, don't you think that's a little idealistic going to, if you get the opportunity to go to Washington? I say, no, absolutely not. I think that's what we need in Washington. We need people to say, hey, enough is enough with the deficit spending. And as the Knox County mayor, we refinanced bonds. We did. I kept saying these things aren't very sexy, and they didn't get much coverage in the press. But if you look at counties our size all across our nation during that time, we were. And please eat when the food gets here. Is that beef we're having? Dadgum, I thought we were having chicken. Colonel Sanders is jealous of me every time I come here. I've eaten more chickens here than I have at Kentucky Fried Chicken, I can tell you that. We refinanced bonds. We did things that people weren't really comfortable with. We got out of derivatives, some crazy stuff. We paid cash for a school. I remember they told me, they said, that's not the way we've always done it around here. Our bond rating rose, unemployment is down, and matter of fact, in our country right now, it's the lowest it's been in 40 years, since 1969. Another issue I'm concerned, and those are kind of things I think we need to be talking about in Washington. They're not talking about it, they're talking, it's the flavor of the moment. It's whatever raises people's emotions and divides our country, it seems. And really all those parties are doing is selling memberships. I won't say who it was, but I was with a prominent member of my party eating at Long's drugstore one day having breakfast. And I remember his phone rang, and I said, you better get that, it might be important. And he said, no, it's Schumer, I'll just call him back. And that made me think pretty quick, it's just the game they're playing, folks. They get us all riled up and they yell at each other on the news, then they go back to their respective homes and tell them how bad the other party is. And guess what? It depends on which year, but 95 to 98% of them get reelected every year. And they just laugh at us and go off on some junk at the Kennebunkport that the lobbyist is paying for. And don't think that that's not happening. It happens in Nashville. It happens in Washington, D.C. And I think that we've got to look at something that makes people uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. It's term limits. At what point we implement them, I don't know, but we've gotta quit sending folks back and back and back, and we never resolve any of the problems because they keep their solution to most things is just the same dadgum program, the same thing, raise taxes, we're going to do this, and then they never do it. Another issue I'm concerned about, of course, is health care. There's people that'll push a single payer or a socialist form of health on our country. If we invoke what they're trying to do, that will cost the taxpayers of this country $32.6 trillion. So that means we double everybody's taxes, every individual's taxes, and every business taxes. And then in 10 years, it's back upside down again. That's not saving any more money. If you look at what's going on too, if we were to do that, I would dare say everybody in here has some insurance under some program. If we were to do that, that would do away. I saw Speaker Ryan spoke, I believe it was last night or the night before, and was talking about it. And basically it would do away with every one of your plans that we have out there. And folks will tell you that we're discriminating against folks that have pre-existing conditions. Well, there's two lines of thought there. Pre-existing conditions, you can say somebody like myself who rides a motorcycle, who I have insurance but doesn't want to get insurance. Sir, come on in. You know what time this thing started? I'm sorry. All right, well, you're going to get the chicken. Everybody else is getting steak. But back to what I was saying. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, pre-existing conditions. So say I'm riding a motorcycle. I do ride a motorcycle, and I have been known to fall off the back of one of those occasionally, and I have been known to break a limb. Say I didn't have insurance, and then I break a limb, and then I go buy insurance. That's one area that you have to look at. That's not right. That is not right. It's irresponsible, and that's not right. But the other folks you look at folks with mental illness. They have children that are born with catastrophic diseases. They lose their insurance and try to pick it up somewhere else, and they can't get it. Well, there's an area we ought to be looking at that nobody is looking at now. There's a guy that used to work for President Obama, Mr. Holder, who you would think a lot of people from my party wouldn't quote, but I'm going to quote him. He said between Medicare and Medicaid fraud alone, there is close to $140 billion in fraud. I would think with some of that money, we've got a lot of people who do very well at what they do, but I would think the first thing we would do is look at the fraud and start prosecuting some of these criminals that are doing this in our country. $140 billion, and that's misappropriation, that's fraud, that's all up and down the line, but I think we could look at that, and that could go a long ways in taking care of some of those people. And also, if you look at capitalism, that seems to be something that a lot of folks in this country try to embarrass people about, that they like capitalism. I'm on the other end. I enjoy capitalism. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a great system. LASIK surgery, when it first came out, was thousands and thousands of dollars per eye. Anybody here had LASIK surgery? I'm sure you had. Cost thousands of dollars. Now, if you go to get it done, there are actually people that could do it for $500 per eye. Now, I don't know if I want to get my eyeball cut on by somebody who takes a coupon or not, but my point is that capitalism does work. It drives costs down. We ought to start looking at things like that. And we ought to get out of the way of some of these doctors, and we ought to get the insurance companies out of the business, out of the medical room. We ought to let it ought to be a decision between the doctors and patients. Another area I'm interested in is energy. We live in the most wonderful area of the country, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the Y-12 nuclear weapons complex, which are not in the 2nd Congressional District, but upwards to 5,000 to 6,000 folks that actually work in there and work in some of the areas that feed off of it, live in the 2nd Congressional District. We need to start talking about energy independence. We have our military right now in over 100 countries, and I dare say most people in this room could not name those 100 countries. Yet when you join the military, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And I'm not sure what some oil sheik has to do with America's Constitution other than the price of oil, the price of gasoline down here at the filling station. We need to bring those folks home. We need to develop our own energy resources here in this country, and we could do that with the brain power down in Oak Ridge. That would, if we could, some of those billions of dollars that we send overseas to some of these nations, and you got to realize these nations, they don't respect us at all. All they want is our money. They treat women like their property. They throw gay folks off of buildings, and these are people that we would normally, unless we were doing business with them, we wouldn't have anything to do. We need to cut the aid off to them. We need to quit doing business. We need to develop our own energy resources here. Another area that's close, near and dear to my heart is veterans. It was mentioned that I mentioned my father being in the Marine Corps. Our VA is a disaster. I don't care what anybody tells you. Congressman Phil Rowe has gone a long way of fixing a lot of the problems. But our VA, when you think that 20 to 30 American fighting men and women commit suicide a day in this country, that's a disgrace. That's an indictment on the Democrats and the Republicans. And right now, currently, if you're a veteran and you want to go see a VA doctor, most of the time you have to go to Johnson City. Johnson City. You have to go there to see a pharmacist. Now, when Kelly or myself need to see a pharmacist, we go down to Long's drugstore. What we need to have in this country is a system, and we need to do away with what's going on right now. A veteran ought to be able to just take a card and say, I'm a veteran. I want to go see any dadgum doctor or any pharmacist I want to see in the country, anywhere, just like anybody else in this room does. And I'll tell you what, if you put Congress under the VA system, I bet it would have been solved yesterday. Do we have any veterans in here? God bless y'all. Thank you. I appreciate it. As a Christian, I'm not a very good one, but I owe y'all everything I have in my life but my salvation. Even you, Dick. Thank you, brother. There's my neighbor over there. Raise your hand, Dick. I'm recognizing you. There you go. Thank you. But I think that would be an easy solution. Of course, you're dealing with bureaucrats, and you're not going to. And it's really you're dealing with victims. They're not concerned about welfare. They're concerned about job security. And with that, I will answer any questions you have. And I do want to thank my buddy Will Pugh being here, because he used to be a constant thorn in my side in the legislature. When Ben Ashley left, I thought, great, we won't have to deal with Will Pugh anymore. And dadgummit camped out in my office, and we actually passed some pretty substantial legislation, if I remember correctly, Will.
Why don't you tell them that you passed the legislation to make Tennessee the first state that have the Uniform Accountancy Act. And now just about all the states that follow it.
Well, it sounds a lot better when you say it, Will, actually. Actually, Will was, I remembered, Ben actually was there, and the Tennessee Theater was under a weird situation, and they couldn't, and people were trying to donate to it, and they were setting up a foundation and things. And I remembered we'd passed the legislation, and we had gone through all the committees, and it was on the Senate floor. It was about I think it was the second to last day of the legislature, I believe it was, Will. And he called me, and we had it all, everything was great, but he called me and said there's been a mistake on the bill and in the amendment, and they flipped two words around. And so it doesn't sound like a lot, but when the committees close down in the Senate, they close down. They're not going to open them up because they're afraid some other nefarious group will slide something in. So there was just no way, and you're really not supposed to amend anything out of the Finance Committee on the Senate floor. And I told him that, and he said, well, we're going to be sunk without it. And so I went up and talked to Lieutenant Governor and told him my situation. He said, which bill is it? And I said, it's the very first one. He said, good. And so usually everybody's still getting their coffee on the first bill. And I remembered they asked, I made it a substitute amendment and changed some of the content of the bill. It wasn't against the rules. It was just something that they didn't like you to do. And I remember I prayed about it. I said, Lord, usually it's my mistake and I need some help, but this time it definitely was not my mistake. And you know what? Nobody paid it a bit of attention. We passed that. And so who says prayers aren't answered? So Will, thank you, brother. I'll stop there. Yes, ma'am.
Can you just talk briefly about your views on immigration?
Yes, ma'am. Immigration it's a tough issue. I support building a wall or something towards it. Last year, well, let's say 2014, I had the numbers down, but it was in excess of $100 million of what it costs us when someone comes here illegally and has a child. Now, separating the families at the borders, I think that's wrong. That was actually something under the under the Clinton administration that went through Bush, then Clinton, and now President Trump. And now, of course, it's being brought to the forefront by our friends in the media, mainly, I think, as a shot at our president, but that's fine. But I think that they're making a mistake. They don't need to separate the families. They need to keep the families together. But the problem you have is what we've dealt with a lot and nobody's talking about is human trafficking. And one of the largest, and the number one country in the world that human traffics into this country is Mexico. So I think we need to address that, and we need to just say, we need to show all our cards. And I think there's probably a solution out there. I think there's a group of people, I tell people it's like a boat that's got a hole in it. There's one group of people who just wants to sink the boat. They're anarchists. They don't care. And a country without borders ceases to be a country. There's another group that wants to just bail and hope they can get through the next election cycle. And there's people like me that want to plug the hole and then start bailing. I was actually, as the mayor, one of the coolest things I ever got to do was speak at the naturalization ceremonies. And if you ever get the opportunity to go there, you talk about proud Americans. They will flat put you on your heels on their knowledge of this country. And my friend Albert Harb spoke, and he talked about the right way to come to this country, because his family did. You know, an uncle and his dad, I think, his uncle or grandfather, I think, came here, and then they brought someone else, and they did it the right way. And to think that folks that have spent 10 to 12 years to get in this country legally, and then somebody can just come across the border and do it illegally, to me is a slap in the face at those hardworking folks that are Americans now. And I think there's a right way to do it, and we need to do that. And there's also the Visa Work Program, which was implemented, I believe, under President Reagan, which they kind of thrown out. That's probably something they're going to have to start looking at again, and looking at it in the other trades as well. But I think there's a solution to it. But right now, like I said, all they're doing is selling memberships. It's the boogeyman. Everybody's scaring everybody on both sides. When I was in the legislature, oddly enough, I followed a van of folks, and it was a rundown van, and it was stacked full of folks that were Hispanic. And I followed it into Nashville, and there's one street, and I can't remember what it is now, but a lot of the signs were in Spanish, just up and down the street. And they unloaded the van, and I remember there was a little girl, a little boy, and it didn't look like anybody was there, and somebody was there to meet them. It was just a shady situation. And what they did to those poor folks was they told them at the border, you know, you're not going to be able to get up anywhere. You can't get on a Greyhound, which in fact they could have. They could have paid cash to get on a Greyhound, and for about probably 1/5 of what they were paying. And I actually passed a law that said if you bring folks in, that you can be fined per person. Of course, none of the DAs have the guts to do anything with it. But my point was that those folks were being sold into basically some sort of slavery, and it really troubled me about the little boy and the little girl, what kind of life they would lead and who was waiting. And they ended up busting a fellow over there in Nashville, Hispanic descent, oddly enough, who was involved in the trafficking. But it's so widespread, but we've got to do something about it. We cannot afford. In Knox County, when I took over as the mayor, we put over $5 million into indigent care. We weren't required to do that, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And it's not the kids' fault that are here. It's the parents. And honestly, if I was down there and under those horrible situations in Central America, I'd get up here as fast as I could. If you want to see the cost of socialism, look at some of those Central American countries. Thank you. That was a good question. Sorry I went to preach, and I'll try not to give a sermon next time there. Yes, sir.
Hello. My question is this. I'm looking at an audience of about 400 people, and I drove 80 miles on a trip to hear you.
And you what?
I drove 80 miles on a trip to hear you. I watched all the debates in primaries. I watched all the debates most of them from the comfort of my home. We have 400 or 500 people who are hearing your presentation, and we got 500 or 600,000 people who are not going to hear it. Why are you not going to go to UT and debate your opponent so we can listen as voters and make our determination?
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate you being here, and I know, and I've had my opponent's friends like yourself follow me around to do that, and I appreciate what you're saying, sir. Wait a minute, I'm still okay. Go ahead.
I drove down to see you in Cambridge because I wanted to say something about veterans and get your opinion. You immediately associated me with two other people who were sitting in the audience that you know, and you attacked them as trolls, and you picked on me because I was very videotaped you. I record all these things to show my friends on social media who are not necessarily liberals or conservatives, but they want to know.
Sir, yes, sir.
What our people are going to be made of.
Are you going to ask me a question, or are you going to give me a statement?
Are you going to debate without attacking me and being one of the trolls?
Sir, we're here. I've been at multiple forums, and I go to these things, and honestly, they're put on by folks like yourself who are not for me. And I read the polls. I know where I stand, and I'm not sure the purpose of somebody coming in too. I think the interesting thing too about DC is, and I think you know my position on veterans, which I think is kind of odd, since about every veterans group in this area has either recognized me or had me speak, and I think that they would know. And I don't remember you mentioning anything about veterans at the thing in Dandridge.
Off the stage.
Sir, there wasn't a stage. There was multiple. It was a Republican event, and obviously, that's fine. That's fine. You're all right. You're all right. Is there any other questions?
Tim, I'd like to ask a question.
Sure. Hey, Cub.
Over the last, few years, it's been getting embarrassing watching the both houses in Washington and now our president on how they are reacting and acting, if you will. And this really question will be for both of the candidates. I'll raise your hands, Renee, when you get there. But how can y'all make a difference in making it more civilized and more what we want y'all to do in Washington?
Well, when I was in Nashville, as Mr. Pugh and a lot of the folks can tell you, most of the time I was in Nashville, I was in the minority. And I was the most prolific, probably one of the most prolific bill passers in the legislature, because I was seen as somebody that would at least listen to both sides. I listened to everybody. We would have multiple, I tell everybody they get 15 minutes regardless who they are. And a lot of the groups, honestly, were there to disrupt and were not ever going to be for me. But I listened to them, and I would listen to their point of view. I think you got to realize you represent everybody. Up to the election, it's a partisan event. It's partisan. I'll run as a Republican, and I'm not ashamed of that. And I'm a conservative. I think personal responsibility. I like our military. I like owning a firearm. I stand for life. Those kind of things that differentiate me probably from a lot of folks. So I don't have a problem, and I think people know where they are. And generally on a one-on-one, when you're in a forum like this, people want to disrupt and make a scene and record things and try to trip you up. And I think the public is very much aware of that now. But I think that you've got to have an open mind, and you've got to listen to all sides, because after the election day, the partisan stuff should stop. Unfortunately, it doesn't nowadays with the social media. I mean, it's just everywhere you go, you're in a parking lot, somebody comes up and tries to interrupt you, or you're eating at a restaurant with your wife and daughter, and somebody comes up and says something offensive in front of your 11-year-old daughter. And those kind of things you have to kind of differentiate between the other. And so I've always tried to keep an open mind, and I think the public respects my point of view. When I first ran for office, we won with about 2 3/4 percentage point in the first primary I won. And the last time I had opposition, I was above 85%. So I think as a mayor, but then we started over again running for Congress. So I think we've the open-mindedness of it is what you've got to consider. You getting ready to give me the hook, ma'am?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm waiting for a glass, so I get some.
Were you going?
We're almost ready to give the hook.
All right.
But I'll take the opportunity to do the last question.
All right.
And this is kind of a tough question, but it's a serious one because it just happened in Blount County. And it has to do with the 2nd Congressional District on lethal weapons carried by law enforcement. So, and I'll stand up so everybody can hear me. So 2 weeks ago in Blount County, we had a young sheriff who was called in by the mother. The mother has a young adult son, strapping young son.
Now, was it the sheriff or was it a deputy?
It was an officer. Let's
Sheriff
just leave it as
Barong.
that.
Okay, it wasn't
Yeah.
Sheriff Barong. It was one of his
It was an
deputies.
officer
Okay.
who was called in, and the son has a mental illness. They arrive. Son's carrying an axe, won't put it down, and he is shot 6 times and he's killed in front of the mother. Now, my question is, and don't get me wrong, I have a safe full of guns, and I'm a very good shot with handguns. Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind.
I'm a good shot. Let's put it that way. And I like my rifles and my shotguns, etc. And ironically, even though I am a CPA, I have fugitive recovery background. So in the fugitive recovery background area, when we train these agents, we use pepper spray.
Right.
Number 1 line of defense. We have, our police departments have great paintballs. And paintballs are very painful with cayenne pepper, by the way. We have bean bags, and if you ever shot out of a shotgun with a bean bag, it'll knock you right off your feet and can break your ribs. Tasers will make you hurt for a couple of days. All effective weapons. My comment, or my question is what are your views about, for the safety of the public, for the safety of our officers, having lethal weapons reserved as they are in other nations for an elite group of specially trained officers as opposed to any officer getting to carry these?
That's a multifaceted question. First of all, mentally ill folks, it's a different world. I have one of my best friends is mentally ill. He's bipolar, and I was able to get him into housing, and I'm proud to say he has a job now and has bought a house. Literally. I mean, he's gone from all that, but not everybody has a best friend that's a state senator. And unfortunately, in this country, we've chosen to warehouse. We warehoused our mentally ill first, and now we give them narcotics and put them out on the street, and they can do one of 3 things. They can either sell it, OD on it, or not take it. Unfortunately, any of those is those three options are not very good for society, and we've seen that. And as the mayor, we built a behavioral health center, and we caught a lot of flack for it, honestly, because it wasn't the conservative thing to do. But the reality is these folks are not criminals; they're mentally ill, and they need to be addressed with that. Everybody in here, 1 in 3 Tennesseans is affected by it, either by themselves, their family, or themselves maybe. And the problem we have is that if I cut my hand, if I walk out of here on one of Mr. Rothschild's butter knives, and I go to the emergency room, nobody thinks anything of it. But if I got something in my head, and I start talking about it, there's a stigma attached to it, and we've got to get past that. But that's part of the problem, and part of the problem too is training. I think that we've got to train our law enforcement to spot those mental illnesses, which we do in Knox County. I'm proud to say there's an actual class that they take to spot those things. But you get to the point where you're second guessing the law enforcement, and somebody comes at you with an axe. You got a young deputy, he's got some adrenaline, semi-automatic weapon. You know how that doesn't end well. And so I can't really second guess them. I don't know all the details on that. So it's an unfortunate situation. But as far as an elite, I would think that sounds good. It might work good in England or somewhere else. But in Blount County, they're not going to have the money. I don't know where you would, if it would say the elite group was in Knox County and they had to come in for that, or they had a specially trained group of officers. I just don't see the logistics of that unless we have a cop on every corner, and we can't afford that anyway, and I wouldn't be for that. But I've never actually heard of that scenario, but I'd be really cautious if we did that, in doing that. I think in certain areas, big cities, that could work, like say Chicago, where there's 20 or 30 shootings every weekend that we never hear about, and which is very unfortunate. But, and I'll take one more because I know somebody was getting ready to give me the hook. There's somebody back here. Yes, sir.
Well, I was going to ask you a question about the national debt, but I think speaking of a bunch of accountants, you brought that up immediately as your first topic, knowing you're speaking to accountants.
Well, I bring that up when I'm talking to the garden club, you know. Because, you know, it's funny, my mom and daddy both been in heaven for a while, but I'll still find the back of one of my mama's checkbooks, and she would stick little coupons in her Bible and stuff, and I'll still find those. And I think, you know, my mama could have balanced this country's budget on the back of a checkbook, but she would have put a couple of those guys across her knee, and they would not have enjoyed that at all. So, go ahead, brother.
One thing you didn't address, which is I think a big concern, because I feel like the last Great Recession was caused by giving mortgages to people who couldn't pay them back.
Yes, sir.
And as a very recent retiree, my most concern in retirement, frankly, is a great downfall in the economy, which would be caused by the national debt that we build up in the country. One part of that's been addressed in Washington to some extent is the student loan debt. And you
right.
address that is I mean, you know, for us people that, you know, that we work jobs and we went through school, and I paid for 2 kids to get through their master's degree, and now we're seeing people that in Washington, they're talking about just forgiving all the past student loans.
Yes, sir.
And if they don't forgive it,
I think that's a bait and switch for young folks, is getting folks to vote for their candidate by saying they're going to. I think Bernie Sanders, you know, doing away with all student loans. That's ridiculous. They're adults. They made a bad decision. It's not. Should it be somebody in this room's? You know, should I be the one that have to pay because they've got a major in something that they can't get a job for? To me, I just don't find that to be a responsible answer. What we've got to do is we've got to make sure that these loans are not being put out to just that are government insured loans, I guess I should say. If private investors want to invest in those kind of things, that's their business. But I go back to my daddy. He told me one time something. We were at a UT football game. We were leaving, and some ball player had gotten in trouble, and the callers were saying, "Well, he's 20. He's just a 21-year-old kid." And somebody said, "CB," that's what they called my dad, Charlie Bird. Said, "What were you doing when you were 21?" He said, "I was running up a hill on Okinawa with a Thompson submachine gun and 10 pounds of TNT strapped to my back. If you'd called me a kid, I won't tell you exactly what he said, but he said we'd have had a problem." I think in this country, folks, we've got to start looking at personal responsibility, honestly. Personal responsibility. Somebody's got to be responsible. Did you get all that applause? Did you write that applause down? Somebody's got to be responsible for what's going on, and it needs to be the individual. You and I, this generation, cannot keep funding bad mistakes by other people in other countries. I'm Tim Burchett. I would appreciate your vote. I got the Cub here with me. We've got yard signs out in our car. We didn't bring them in. If you want one, come get
CPAs to introduce my friend, Renee Hoyos. I met Renee approximately 16 years ago at her welcome party as the new executive director to the Tennessee Clean Water Network. And we have been friends ever since. For all of us who have worked with not-for-profits, I believe we all know quite well that when you run a not-for-profit, you are running your business. Renee knows budgets, she knows how to deal with the personnel, and she definitely knows how to deal with your local government bodies. Tennessee Clean Water Network has spent years and years working with government bodies, and Renee has to be one of the most intelligent, articulate, and thoughtful people that I've encountered. I told her earlier today, I said to her father, I said, there's very few people that I call and consult with when I have a question, and Renee, I'm proud to call not only my friend, but also a woman that I am happy to consult with. So come on up, Renee.
Thank you, everyone, thank you, Renee, for that warm welcome, and definitely thank you all from the Tennessee Society of CPAs for holding this forum. I've been invited to 8 forums in the general election, and I've attended all of them, and I'm happy to come speak to your group. So I know those of you that have civic groups that are looking for speakers, I'm sure Mayor Burchett and I would love to attend your lunch meeting as well. So yeah, I was the executive director of the Tennessee Clean Water Network, and I was that director for 14 years. And I loved every minute of it. It was never on my bucket list to be a politician. In fact, I used to say that I don't want to be the one getting yelled at. I want to be the one doing the yelling. So, because it is tough to be a politician. But after the election, 2016, I realized that after doing 20 years of public policy, that our safety nets are getting eroded, and it didn't happen in the 2016 election. It's been going on for decades, and I certainly saw it in the environmental community. The environmental acts that were given to us by the Nixon administration had funding pots and programs, and this funding pot would go away, and that funding pot would go away, and this program would go away, and then there was just a skeleton left of these acts. And it's the same in many of the other acts that provide a safety net for us, that protect our public health and our welfare, our safety, and our education system. So I thought, well, how can I step up? How can I contribute in a way that's meaningful? And I started thinking about this position, and I started thinking about it actually prior to Congressman Duncan's announcement of his retirement. And I thought, well, I need to investigate this a little bit because it's a big issue. So I did 50 interviews. I just started talking to people and asking them, what do you think? What are the issues? What does it take to be a candidate? And in those 50 interviews, honestly, I thought that I would I'd be talked out of it. And people were really enthusiastic. They said, "Oh no, run." And I spoke to Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all kinds of folks. And through those 50 interviews, I figured out how a campaign is run. It's an organization, very similar to an organization that's like a nonprofit. You get your issues, you find your staff, you raise your money. It's the same thing. So I put my staff together, and my campaign manager, Will Calloway, was a he was a Democratic nominee himself, had been through the whole process. He came on as campaign manager in January. A lot of young people from the University of Tennessee, the Young Dems, have stepped up to work on my campaign. The past president of the UT Young Dems is my field organizer, and he's been doing a great job. I've just been very lucky to have a lot of assistance. And then I started thinking, so what are the issues here? What are people really concerned about? I've worked pretty exclusively in the environmental community, but what else is out there? And by and large, people said it's healthcare. Healthcare, the insurance is unaffordable and inaccessible. We have an opioid crisis, and quite frankly, we have a substance use disorder crisis. It's not just opioids. Folks are having problems with substance abuse in many areas. We have hospital closures, the largest number of hospital closures per capita here in Tennessee. And when a hospital closes, it doesn't just affect the outcomes in that community. Most likely it'll be a rural community, and we have a lot of that in the 2nd District. But it also immediately impacts the economy of those communities because jobs are lost from the hospital. And it also affects the future economy because companies don't want to relocate in places where there's no hospital. So when hospital closures happen, it's a big rippled effect. And I think that it's very important that we work to make sure that we keep our safety nets robust and that we keep these hospitals open and as it pertains to health insurance and to health care. Folks told me, we're concerned about public education. There's a meme going around that our public education system is failing, and I don't think that's true. I think it has some challenges, but we do need to work on making sure that our children are educated and educated for the jobs of the future. One of the things I'd like to support is a reauthorization of the Perkins Act. The Perkins Act has a lot of vocational training funding in it, and I'm hearing from a lot of manufacturers that they don't have enough people that are trained in the jobs in the technical assistance field that they need. And we need to prepare the next generation for the jobs that are coming up. It's very important that we do that. We also need to help folks that want to go to college and get loans. I got a loan myself when I went to college, and I paid 2.25% interest, and I was allowed to refinance my loans. Now, students are telling me they're paying upwards of 8 to 10% interest on their student loans, and that they're not allowed to refinance. And so what we've asked our college educated population is to come get a four-year education, and now you can't pay for it because the interest is so high. It's higher than you'd probably pay for a mortgage. And how can we bring that down? And we can bring that down. I've been doing environmental work for 20 years, and many people on both sides of the aisle said to me, don't ignore your environmental chops. We all want clean air and clean water. We need those things to live. And so I'm very protective of our environmental regulations and our environmental laws. I think it's important that we protect public health and with these laws, and I've watched them be eroded over the years. And finally, we've given a tax break to the wealthiest people in this country. Our economy is moving along at a nice clip. I think it's time to increase the minimum wage. $7.25 an hour is not enough to live on. My proposal is to raise it $1 an hour a year for 3 years, and then tie it to an index, probably cost of living index, so that we can assure that our workers, who are the engine of our economy, can afford to participate in civic life, that they can afford to participate in this capitalist society that requires that you buy things. And so those are the 4 big issues that I'm running on, and I'm happy to take questions for my 25 minutes, and I will definitely stay after, although I do have a 3 o'clock I have to boogie off to. So questions, anyone? Yes, ma'am.
Talk briefly about your views on immigration.
Yeah, so before I did environmental work, I worked for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center back in the Reagan administration, so I'm dating myself. Back when the Republican administration really recognized that you need a pathway to citizenship, and you need to have a worker visa program, and that you need to have a way for folks to come out of the shadows. And that was overturned in the 90s in the Clinton administration. And so what we have now is a policy that's vague. And when things are vague, then that's how you can criminalize people. And my solution to the immigration problems that we are addressing is, well, world peace would be the first thing that you would want to do. Because what I noticed was folks were coming here from countries, I did asylum interviews on the border, and they were escaping economic and political persecution. And when you've got that happening in your country, you can't wait 8 years to go through the citizenship process. You have to come now. And so since we don't have a well-articulated policy, folks are coming up here and are met with the ways in which we deal with it, which can be arbitrary. It depends on the administration. So I'd like to see us have a good policy and a good pathway to citizenship, a worker visa that is not necessarily tied to countries, to quotas from countries, a bridge that goes from a worker visa to citizenship if that's an opportunity. There are people that come here to work that don't necessarily want to stay. But for example, my father is here, Josue Hoyos. My grandparents came from Mexico. And they came up here to start a new life, and they raised 5 children, and those children have become productive members of this society. And I'm standing before you asking for your vote for Congress, and this is how immigration works. And a lot of us here in this room are the product of immigration. And unless you are of full Native American descent, that your family probably came here by crossing a border or getting on a boat. And we should be open to that, because they bring new ideas. They come to this country and fall in love with it in a way that makes them want to be productive members. And we need to bring them out of the shadows. And as for DACA, I think that's an issue that really needs to be addressed. DACA is deferred action, which means we don't make a decision. We just sort of kick the can down the street. And DACA is for a very limited number of people. And we do need to address this issue of when children come here very, very young and embrace this country as their own, what kinds of citizenship can we offer them? So those are things that I'd probably like to work on as well when I get there. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
How many hospitals have you heard of, like in Tennessee, that have actually closed down? I was just curious.
I don't have the exact number. I know that another one in the 3rd just recently announced closure. That's a good question. I don't have that number right on the top of my head, but I do know that we have the largest number, I want to say per capita. Texas beats us with just the flat out number. But it has been a problem. And, hopefully this hospital will be bought by someone else and they'll be able to keep it open. One of the things I'd like to do is to offer clinics for veterans through a program offered by the VA that they can establish themselves in these rural hospitals, provide service to veterans, and when there's overflow, they can provide services to other folks in the community. They could get money from the VA to help them stay open. So I think there are some things we can do around rural hospitals that we can keep them open. Another thing, of course, is expanding Medicaid. That is a state issue, and I will say the Democratic Party is running strong candidates up and down the ballot, and a lot of them are running on the expansion of Medicaid, and that would have done a lot to help us keep these hospitals open. Yes, sir.
What's your view on Obamacare?
I think the Affordable Care Act has some good bones. I was a founding member of the Community Health Alliance. It was Tennessee's first cooperative insurance company. It rose and fell in just a few short years, but the idea of it was to try to bring prices down from the insurance companies, and it did work. We had the lowest premiums in the country the first 2 years we had the Affordable Care Act working the way it should here. But it does need tune-ups. It didn't come out fully formed. The subsidies for the middle class need to be tinkered with. It never got to executive compensation, that kind of thing. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, what good is it if they keep changing companies? 1 year Blue Cross is in, 1 year Humana's in, and what happens, in order to be able to get in there, they tell you got to take this type of thing. I had a problem. And my wife had cancer, and next thing I know, I'm paying $30,000 out of pocket because Blue Cross couldn't keep her insured anymore.
Yeah, these problems with the insurance companies. Because what ended up happening with the Community Health Alliance, which was going to offer low-cost health insurance, was the big insurance companies really sunk into their assets, did a deep dive into them, and then priced us out of the market. And what we need is more market competition so that prices can be lowered. And one of the ideas that we've been working on in the campaign is that we can lower the age of eligibility of Medicare to 55 with a premium. If that seems to work, we'd lower it all the way down to whoever wants to, participate in Medicare, and that would be a low-cost option for these health insurance companies so that they would have to look at their pricing and bring it down. When we were in our second year at the Community Health Alliance, we had to submit our actuarials 3 times before they'd be approved by the state insurance commissioner. And because of that, every time that we had to submit them, they had to go up. She was unconvinced that we could meet our finances, our obligations with such low actuaries. So we raised them 3 times, and then the federal government was supposed to release something called the risk corridor, which is a risk pool of money so that we could pay our claims. That release of money was blocked by Congress, and so a lot of companies ended up going out of business. The co-ops went down just one by one. There were about 36 of them, and they fell within 6 months. We lost all but one cooperative health insurance company. So I think there is a lot of things that need to be done, but I really, with the power of these insurance companies, a lot of folks are talking about single payer. I just don't see that happening soon, but we do need to increase competition into the marketplace, because with only 1 or 2 players in the counties, you're just going to be subject to whatever price they want to come up with. And I am very concerned about this notion of kicking people off if they have a pre-existing condition. I think probably all of us know someone who's got one. In fact, I had cancer when I was 23. I had malignant melanoma, and I became uninsurable for the next 14 years. And it was a hardship. It was not a hardship for me because, I was very lucky that we got it early. But for a lot of people, it's not like that. And to kick people off when they need it the most, I think, is immoral. Yes, sir.
Do you not feel that raising the minimum wage rapidly like that would simply leave people in the same situation because it would be a driver for inflation?
I don't think so. I'm not proposing a $15 an hour increase, and the increase is $1 an hour a year for 3 years, and then just hook it to an index. We've looked at some MIT research that shows that probably wouldn't be necessarily a driver of inflation, as long as you don't do a big jump really quickly. So there's lots of folks out there that want to go from 725 to 15. That would probably do it, but I think with a slow rate like that, it probably wouldn't. I have an economics team. These were the folks that I put together to help guide me on some of these economic policies. Some of you perhaps know Ann Mayhew and Dan Murphy and Sherry Casper. They're all UT economy. Well, Sherry Casper's at Maryville, but we really sat down and looked at research and data and what could we expect to get, because what we're getting is the opposite effect. We have people that are working 3 and 4 jobs, barely able to make it, and they're having a hard time buying health insurance. They're having a hard time participating in civic life and having a life that's meaningful. And I think that does cost us in the end. So, yes, sir.
I asked Tim a student loan question, so it's fair to ask a similar.
Sure.
You addressed that issue, but you said part of the solution was to give 2.5% below market rate interest loans to students as they go through school, which I guess we've been doing forever. I came out of the military and I had one of those degrees you couldn't get a job with, so I used my GI Bill to go back and get an accounting degree to become a CPA. And I worked part-time while I was going through DC to get my accounting degree. And when I hear students that say that they don't, when they don't have the money to go to college, well, the first thing I said to them was, why don't you go in the military? Or either the National Guard, because the military, the National Guard, they'll pay for your education. And of course, the response is, oh, I can't do that, I couldn't go in the military. Well, why as a society should we give low interest rate loans to people to go to college who are unwilling to go in the military and earn?
Well, I would say that the military is probably not for everyone. And I will say we have a number of veterans working on the campaign who have told me that they were only, through the GI Bill, given 16 credits. So it's not like the military is paying for your entire education. It really just only pays for 2 years. I'd had a job. I worked all through my college, and I still had to take out loans because tuition is high and the cost of living is high. And so we can talk about the costs associated with living and how to bring those down so that we can bring the price of student loans down. But I really think that if we're going to ask our next generation to become educated and to be drivers of our economy, the least we can do is make sure that they're not paying 8 to 10% interest on a $50,000 or $100,000 student loan. I just think we haven't done it prior. It was 2.25% for many, many years, and I think it needs to go back to that. Yes, ma'am. Way in the back.
Follow up about education.
Uh-huh.
It's for-profit education that gets large credit card companies who will hand to anyone who asks for it $90,000 for an accounting degree that you sit at your computer at home and you get. Whether or not you are actually kind of inclined towards that. So you end up with a $90,000 student loan. You owe the company or the college $5,000. They will not release your transcript, period. You can't get a resume put together without a transcript to follow up and get a job. So you're caught in this, and the interest just keeps building and building. So for-profit education, in my view, is exactly what is wrong with education and student loans today.
Mm-hmm.
Burchett said he thought we needed to not have the federal government insure these. That is absolutely correct. If the federal government insures a credit card company who will give you a $90,000 student loan, they won't give you a credit card company except if it's tied to that education.
So are you talking about, so you're saying that these private colleges, I'm sorry, I was there a question?
Like Strayer University, and you see them advertising on TV all the time.
Yeah.
Clinics and all kinds of stuff.
Well, yeah, I think those colleges need to be regulated, and we have had some work in that area done. I believe under the Obama administration, there were some guidelines put on what they could do, and so I agree. I think some of these colleges are predatory towards students, and that should not be allowed. But remember, people are looking for the people are looking for an education, and these colleges come and promise them the world, and they don't really explain to them exactly what they're getting into. And so I think that definitely needs to be regulated.
They don't assess whether that person is even going to be capable of
Mhm.
that degree to earn that living, to follow that student loan.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
My take.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, yes.
What's your, I guess, thoughts on, Medicaid, Medicare helping with assisted livings instead of sitting in nursing homes that cost triple, double, 4 times sometimes?
Yeah, that's going to be a big issue that we're going to have to be dealing with. My mother actually is in assisted living, and it is very expensive, and it's I do worry because
Expensive as a nursing home.
yeah.
In Tennessee, nursing homes cost 4 or 5 times what an assisted living will be, and you get a lot better care, but you don't have any help with an assisted living.
Right. I think that we need to protect Medicare and Social Security. I think definitely we need to talk about how we're going to deal with an aging population that will be going to assisted living and nursing care, because it is something that we're not having a national discussion about, but I know lots of families are really concerned because they're having to meet these. They've got an ill family member that needs to go, but they don't have the money to do it. And so are we going to ask Medicaid and Medicare to pay for it? And then how do we pay for that? I think that's a problem that's looming on the future that we really need to get our hands around. Yes, sir.
One immediate problem is in Congress, both Senate and representatives, they're not working together. They're working for the Democrats or they're working for the Republicans. They're not working for us, the American public. How would you get that result?
Well, that's the reason why I'm running, and I've worked on both sides of the aisle. I had to pass environmental legislation at the state legislature, and I did lobby the federal government on many times, and you don't get everything you want the first time you ask. Sometimes you have to make compromise, and I think we need to start talking a little bit more like that. I've tried to, on the campaign trail, we've spoken a lot about how we do need to reach across the aisle, how we do need to come together to solve the problems of today, because they're great and they're getting bigger. And I really feel that Congress has been broken, and it's not willing to work with the other side. It's gotten too partisan. This experiment in the extremes isn't working for any of us. And that's why I'm running, because I want to be a new face in Congress to help work out these issues. And all across the country, we've got people like me who have not interacted in the political world stepping up and saying, we need a new type of politician, a politician with integrity, a politician with guts, that can stand up to the parties and to corporations. I did not take any PAC money for the primary, and thank you. And I am not taking any PAC money from the general. I am only taking donations from individuals, and largely from the 2nd District. If you look at my FEC filings, you'll see that the majority of my donations are from this district, and I was very pointed to make sure that people saw that I have local support. I also think it's good to not take PAC money, and folks are concerned about Citizens United, but it really starts in the campaign. When the campaign is transparent and open and attending forums, that's what you're going to get as a representative. I've turned in my tax returns for 2 years. Those of you that saw them took like 30 seconds to look at because I EZ'd last year. Nothing exciting there in the old tax returns, but I've turned in my tax returns. I go to every forum that's asked. I don't care who asks me, I will show up. I've done over 110 house parties. If you would like to have me in your home to introduce me to your network, I don't care who you are, I'll go. So I think it's very important that you watch how campaigns are run, because that gives you a good idea of how people are going to be when they take office. Yes, sir.
Close to Virginia, state line,
Mm-hmm.
and clients right in the Tri-Cities area. A couple of years ago, the governor of Virginia, through his attorney general, suddenly decided to no longer honor Tennessee hang and carry permits.
Mm-hmm.
And only after threat of a lawsuit did Virginia ultimately reverse its policy. But before it did, it caused a problem for Tennessee residents along the border, especially in the Tri-Cities area, because they could not
handgun carry licenses issued by the Department of Safety. And the largest concentration of those are in East Tennessee. When you were elected to Congress, will you vow to sign on as a sponsor of the National Reciprocity Act and require interstate recognition of the right to carry licenses? And could you explain your reasoning for your answer?
I'm not familiar with that law that you're speaking of. So I'm going to say right now that I'm not going to vow to do something that I haven't had a chance to read and digest. But I will tell you, as an environmental activist, I worked a lot with the hunting clubs, and Ducks Unlimited. I've been a member of Ducks Unlimited, and I go to their event every year. And every year I try to win a Beretta over under, and I've probably spent more money playing all their games than I could have to just buy it outright. I like to shoot skeet when I get the chance, and I'm very, very committed to making sure that hunters get to keep their guns. But for some people, probably shouldn't have guns. And I think we do need to have some more safety gun laws in this country so that guns don't go into the hands of criminals who end up threatening our law enforcement, threatening our children, threatening ourselves, making people nervous about whether they want to go to the movies or go to an outdoor concert. So I think that there are some safety gun laws that we can work on together. But for the most part, I really want to make sure that folks that are law-abiding get to keep their guns, and those that are not don't get to have them.
Do we have time for one more question? If anybody would like one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yes, ma'am.
Tim Burchett has lived in Knoxville forever, and you haven't, so can you just give us a quick sketch on your background?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in California, and I went to schools there. I went to public school. I went to the junior high school that my father taught at. Not while he was there, thank God. But I attended public schools. I was raised in the Napa Valley before it was discovered. So I'm 53 years old. Napa Valley had a roller rink and a movie theater with one screen, and we hated it and wanted to leave. So I got my first degree was in theater arts at San Francisco State University, and I worked in the theater for about 5 or 6 years, and then I decided that I really wanted to do something more meaningful, so I went back to college and I got a degree in environmental toxicology. I got 2 masters, one in avian sciences where I did exclusively environmental toxicology, and then I got a master's of agriculture and management. So I know a lot about chicken farms, and so, but it was a really good degree. I got those in 4 years and managed to get in and out of college with about $20,000 in student loan, which I thought was a lot then. And I hear the student loan debt kids are taking now, and it just is really crushing. I worked in state government, so I've got some experience working with state government, and then I decided that I wanted to leave California because I like to say I've been to the future. And it's crowded, and it's high prices, and it just is a very difficult life. And I got a job here with the Tennessee Clean Water Network, and I remember I came out from my interview, and I went kayaking, and I rode the city bus, and I went to the Smokies, and I did all the tourist things. I went to Dollywood and went to Iams, and I thought, whether I get the job or not, I'm staying, because this is a beautiful place. And I really did fall in love with it. And I have to say, much like immigrants, they come to a country, they fall in love, and they really want to work hard to make life better in the country that they've and in my case, the state that I've chosen to live in. I was very lucky as the executive director of the Tennessee Clean Water Network. I got to travel all over this beautiful state. I did projects in Reelfoot Lake, Clarksville, Savannah, Chattanooga, Tri-Cities, and I just felt like every time I turned the corner on a drive, I was like, wow, it was just really so beautiful here, and I want to work to protect it, and I want everyone in the 2nd District and all of Tennessee to have a good life. I want you to have a life that where you have affordable health care and that your children have the best education we can offer, and that your air and water is clean, and that you're working at a job that gives you the compensation that you need to have a good life. Those are all the things I want for all of us. I don't care what party you're from. Those are the things I want, and that's why I'm running. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
So, thank you, everyone. You had an opportunity.